Adam Reynolds had spent years chasing wealth and status in New York, ashamed of his small-town roots. But when his estranged father dies, leaving behind an unexpected fortune and a legacy of quiet generosity, Adam must confront the truth about the man he abandoned. Can he prove himself worthy before it's too late? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The buzzing of Adam Reynolds' phone interrupted his business meeting. He glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number, and sent it to voicemail. Whatever it was, it could wait. At 32, Adam was on the verge of the biggest deal of his career, a merger that would cement his reputation as one of New York's top financial advisors. As I was saying, Adam continued, flashing his practiced smile at the clients across the polished conference table, this investment opportunity is practically guaranteed to... His phone buzzed again. Same number. Excuse me, he said, his irritation barely concealed. I need to take this. He stepped into the hallway, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. Adam Reynolds speaking, he said sharply. Mr. Reynolds, this is Martha Simmons from Green Valley Medical Center. I'm calling about your father, Thomas Reynolds. Adam's jaw tightened. I haven't spoken to that man in years. Whatever he needs, I'm not interested. I'm sorry to inform you, Mr. Reynolds, but your father passed away last night, heart attack. As his only living relative, we needed to contact you about the arrangements. Adam stood frozen in the hallway of his prestigious office building. The words registered, but the emotion didn't come. Mr. Reynolds, are you there? Yes, he said flatly. I'll have my assistant contact you for details. Is that all? There's also the matter of his personal effects, and email me the information. Adam cut her off. I have to get back to my meeting. He ended the call and took a deep breath, straightening his designer tie before returning to the conference room. The meeting resumed as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, in his luxury penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Adam poured himself a glass of expensive scotch. The lights of the city twinkled below, but he barely noticed them. His thoughts had finally turned to his father, Thomas Reynolds, the man who had embarrassed him his entire life, the grease-stained mechanic who never amounted to anything. Adam remembered how he'd cringed every time his father showed up at school events in his dirty work clothes, how the other kids had teased him about his poor dad. You could have been more, Adam had told him once. You could have made something of yourself instead of wasting your life under car hoods. Thomas had just smiled that sad smile of his and said, "One day, son, you'll understand." But Adam never wanted to understand. As soon as he graduated college, paid for with scholarships and student loans because his father was too poor to help, he'd cut Thomas out of his life. No calls, no visits, nothing. And now you're gone, Adam muttered, swirling the amber, liquid in his glass. And I feel the nothing. Why should he? His father had given him nothing but shame. 3 days later, Adam drove his sleek Mercedes into Green Valley, the small town where he'd grown up. He hadn't been back in over 10 years. Nothing had changed. The same rundown storefronts, the same shabby houses. He sneered at it all, glad he'd escaped. The funeral was brief and sparsely attended. A handful of old men, probably from the auto shop where Thomas had worked. A few neighbors. Adam stood apart from them, checking his watch repeatedly. He had a flight back to New York that evening. He couldn't wait to put this place behind him again. Adam Reynolds. He turned to see a middle-aged woman with kind eyes approaching. I'm Margaret Wilson. I lived next door to your father for 20 years. Nice to meet you, Adam said stiffly, not interested in small talk. Your father was so proud of you, she continued, ignoring his cold demeanor. Always talking about his son, the big-shot New York financial advisor. He kept every article that mentioned your name. Adam shifted uncomfortably. That's nice. He missed you terribly, you know. Look, Ms. Wilson, I appreciate your concern, but my relationship with my father was complicated. Love usually is, she said simply. He understood why you stayed away. He never blamed you. Something twisted in Adam's chest, but he pushed it down. If you'll excuse me, I need to meet with my father's lawyer to settle the estate, what little there is of it. He left her standing there, climbed back into his car, and drove to the address the lawyer had provided. It was a small office above the town's only diner. James Harper was an elderly man with thick glasses and a worn suit. He greeted Adam with a firm handshake. "I've been your father's attorney for 30 years, he explained as they sat down. "He updated his will just 6 months ago." "This shouldn't take long," Adam said dismissively. "I assume he left his house, and whatever savings he had. I plan to sell everything." Harper gave him a curious look. "When was the last time you spoke to your father, Adam?" 10 years ago. "Not that it's relevant." "I see." Harper opened a folder. "Well, there are some things you should know. First, your father left you this letter." He handed Adam a sealed envelope. Adam took it reluctantly, slipping it into his jacket pocket without opening it. "Is there anything else?" "Yes," Harper said. "The reading of the will. As Thomas's only heir, everything goes to you." "Fine. The house can't be worth much, and I doubt he had any savings to speak of." Harper removed his glasses. "I think you might be surprised. The will includes the house, yes, but also Thomas's ownership of Reynolds Automotive." Adam's brow furrowed. "My father worked at Joe's auto shop. He did until 15 years ago when he bought it. He renamed it 5 years later after expanding to 3 locations across the county." "What?" Adam felt the first real shock of the day. "Your father was quite the businessman, actually. In addition to the auto shops, he owned several rental properties in town and had significant investments in local businesses." "That's not possible. My father was a mechanic, just a mechanic." Harper smiled gently. "He was much more than that, son. The total value of your inheritance is approximately $10 million. Adam felt the blood drain from his face. $10 million? Your father lived simply, but he built quite an empire here. He never touched most of the profits. He was saving them." "For what?" "For you," Harper said simply. "It's all in his letter, I believe." Adam's hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, feeling the envelope there. "There's one more thing," Harper continued. "Your father's house. Before you decide to sell it, I suggest you take some time to go through it. Thomas left specific instructions about some items he wanted you to have personally." Adam nodded numbly, his mind still reeling from the revelation. $10 million. His father, the simple mechanic he'd looked down on his entire life, had been a millionaire. An hour later, Adam stood in front of the small house where he'd grown up. From the outside, it looked exactly as he remembered it. Modest, well-maintained, but nothing special. The kind of house a mechanic would live in. He unlocked the door with the key Harper had given him and stepped inside. The familiar smell hit him immediately, a mixture of coffee, old books, and something uniquely his father. Adam had expected to feel nothing, but instead a wave of memories washed over him. The living room was neat and tidy, just as Thomas had always kept it. Photos lined the mantel, mostly of Adam. His graduation, his first job, newspaper clippings of his professional achievements. His father had followed his career from afar, even when Adam had shut him out. On the coffee table sat a stack of birthday cards, all addressed to Adam, all unsent. 10 years' worth of cards his father had written but never mailed, knowing they wouldn't be welcomed. Adam's throat tightened as he picked one up. "To my son, on his 30th birthday," it read. "I'm so proud of the man you've become." He set it down quickly, unwilling to read more. In his father's bedroom, Adam found more surprises. Framed on the wall was Adam's first dollar, earned from mowing lawns as a kid. Beside it hung his college diploma, a copy his father must have requested from the university. On the bedside table was a photo of Adam as a child, sitting on his father's shoulders at a baseball game. Both of them were smiling. Adam couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled like that. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, finally pulling the letter from his pocket. With shaking hands, he opened it. "My dear son," it began in his father's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, I've passed on. I hope it was peaceful, but either way, I've lived a good life." Adam swallowed hard and continued reading. "I know you never saw value in me, and I never blamed you for that. I only wanted you to be happy. You thought I was a poor man, but the truth is, I was never working for myself. I was working for you. Every dollar I earned, I saved. Every sacrifice I made was to give you a better future. I stayed in this small House not because I couldn't afford better, but because every penny saved was a penny for your future. I know you were ashamed of me, of my grease-stained hands and worn clothes, but these hands built something for you, something I hoped would make you proud one day. And now, everything I have, my $10 million fortune, my businesses, my properties, is yours. But I wish, more than anything, that you had just once called me Dad with love in your voice again, like when you were little. I would have given all this money away just to have heard that. I may have left you my fortune, but I would have given it all away. Just to have my son back. Love, Dad. A tear fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. Adam hadn't even realized he was crying. His chest felt tight, like he couldn't breathe. $10 million. His father had been worth $10 million, and Adam had thought him worthless. He'd thrown away his relationship with his father for nothing, worse than nothing. He'd been cruel, dismissive, ashamed of a man who had dedicated his entire life to giving Adam a better future. And now, it was too late to say he was sorry. Adam clutched the letter to his chest and did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He cried for his father. Outside the window, the sun began to set over Green Valley, casting long shadows across the yard where Thomas Reynolds had once taught his son to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to be a man. Lessons Adam had forgotten, but would now need to remember. Because tomorrow Adam would have to face the town that had loved his father, the business his father had built, and the legacy he'd never known existed. And somehow, he would have to find a way to be worthy of it all. Adam woke up in his childhood bedroom, momentarily confused by the faded baseball posters on the walls and the narrow twin bed. The events of yesterday came rushing back: his father's funeral, the shocking revelation of his inheritance, and the letter that had shattered everything he thought he knew about Thomas Reynolds. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. He hadn't meant to stay the night, but after hours of going through his father's things, exhaustion had overtaken him. His phone showed 5 missed calls from his office in New York. The merger deal was waiting, but somehow it didn't seem important anymore. Adam showered and dressed, then wandered into the kitchen. It was exactly as he remembered: the old wooden table where he'd eaten breakfast every morning, the chipped mug his father always used for coffee. He opened the refrigerator out of habit and was surprised to find it stocked with fresh food. "I kept it filled for him," a voice said from the doorway. Adam turned to see Margaret Wilson, the neighbor from the funeral. "I'm sorry, the door was open," she explained. "I've been checking on the house since, well, you know." "Thank you," Adam said and meant it. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make some." Margaret smiled. "That would be nice." As the coffee brewed, Adam found himself asking, "Did you know? About my father's businesses, I mean." Margaret nodded. Everyone in town knew Thomas Reynolds. He gave jobs to half the people here, loans to the other half. When the Miller family lost their home in the fire last year, it was your father who paid for their hotel until insurance came through. Adam's stomach tightened. "I didn't know him at all, did I?" "You knew the father he was to you," Margaret said gently. "He kept his success quiet because he didn't want it to change him. 'I'm still just a mechanic at heart,' he used to say." They sipped their coffee in silence for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Adam finally asked. "Because your father loved you, and because he hoped that someday you'd come home." After Margaret left, Adam drove to Reynolds Automotive. The main shop was larger than he remembered, with a modern facade and a busy parking lot. Inside, mechanics in crisp uniforms worked on luxury cars alongside everyday vehicles. "Can I help you?" asked a middle-aged man in a manager's shirt. "I'm Adam Reynolds, Thomas Reynolds' son." The man's face changed immediately. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Bill Cooper. I was your father's right-hand man for 15 years. We were all devastated to hear about his passing." "Thank you," Adam said awkwardly. I'd like to learn about the business. My father's business." Bill looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, your father always said this place would be yours someday." For the next few hours, Bill showed Adam around the 3 locations that made up Reynolds Automotive. The original shop had expanded to include a body shop, a parts department, and a luxury car service center. The 2 newer locations focused on different specialties, one on commercial trucks, the other on classic car restoration. "Your father built this from nothing," Bill explained. He started by buying the old shop where he worked, then gradually expanded. He had a real head for business, always reinvesting, always planning for the future. "For my future," Adam muttered. "Sir?" "Nothing." "Please continue." By lunchtime, Adam's head was spinning with information. Bill suggested they take a break, leading him to a small diner across the street. "Your dad ate here almost every day," Bill said as they sat down. "Always ordered the same thing, meatloaf sandwich and cherry pie." The waitress approached their table, her eyes widening when she saw Adam. "You must be Thomas's boy," she said. "You look just like him." Adam had never thought he resembled his father. "I do?" "Same eyes," she said, smiling. "Same way of tilting your head when you're thinking." He was so proud of you, that phrase again. Everyone kept saying it, and each time it felt like a knife in Adam's heart. After lunch, Bill took Adam to a modest office building downtown. "This is where your father handled the business side of things," he explained, unlocking the door. "He never spent much on fancy offices, said it was a waste of good money." Inside, Adam found a simple but functional space. His father's office was in the back, a small room with a desk covered in neat stacks of paperwork. On the wall hung framed photos of the business's milestones, ribbon cuttings, expansions, employee award ceremonies, and in every photo, Thomas Reynolds stood slightly to the side, never the center of attention despite being the owner. He wore the same work shirt in most of them, looking more like an employee than the boss. "Your father came in every morning at 6 a.m. and worked until 6 p.m., Bill said. "Never took a day off except Christmas. Even then, he'd swing by if there was an emergency." Adam sank into his father's chair, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. If he had all this, why did he live so simply? Why did he let me believe he was struggling?" Bill leaned against the doorframe. "Your father wasn't interested in showing off. He lived the way he wanted to live. As for what you believed," he paused. "That's something only you can answer." Later that afternoon, Adam met with James Harper again to discuss the legal aspects of his inheritance. He sat quietly as Harper explained the business structures, the investments, the properties, a small empire built piece by piece over 20 years. "Your father was very careful with his planning," Harper said. "Everything is paid for, well-maintained, and profitable. You could sell it all, of course, or you could continue what he started." Adam stared at the stack of documents before him. "I have a job in New York." "Yes, your father mentioned that. He was quite proud of your success." There it was again. That pride Adam had never wanted, had actively rejected. "I need time to think," he said finally. Harper nodded. "Take all the time you need. Your father built all this to last." That evening, Adam returned to his father's house, his house now, and continued going through Thomas's belongings. In the home office, he found meticulously organized files documenting every aspect of his father's life and business. And there was another surprise, a folder labeled simply Adam. Inside were records of every major event in Adam's life that Thomas hadn't been invited to attend. Programs from award ceremonies, news clippings about promotions, even photographs taken from a distance. Thomas had found ways to be present in his son's life even when Adam had shut him out. There was also a statement from a separate bank account. For 20 years, Thomas had deposited money into a trust for Adam, building it to over $2 million. He'd never touched it, never mentioned it. Adam's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his boss in New York. "Reynolds, where the hell are you? We're finalizing the merger paperwork tomorrow. You need to be here." "I'm dealing with my father's estate," Adam said, his voice hollow. "It's complicated." "Well, uncomplicated. This deal is worth millions to the firm and to you." Adam stared at the folder in his hands, at the evidence of his father's unending love. "I need more time," he said finally. "You don't have more time. Either you're here tomorrow or we move forward without you. Your choice." The line went dead. Adam set down the phone, conflicted. His career, everything he'd worked for, was hanging in the balance. But so was his father's legacy, a legacy he was only beginning to understand. He walked through the house again, seeing it with new eyes. It wasn't the home of a poor mechanic, but of a man who had chosen simplicity over luxury, who had poured his wealth not into possessions, but into building something lasting. In the living room, Adam noticed a photo he'd missed before. It showed his father standing in front of the original auto shop the day he bought it. Thomas was beaming with pride, his arm around a younger Bill Cooper. The sign above them read, Reynolds and Son Automotive, and Son. Even then, when Adam had already cut him off, Thomas had included him, Adam's chest tightened. He'd been so wrong, so blind, he picked up the phone and called his boss back. "I've made my decision," he said firmly. "I won't be returning to New York tomorrow." "Then you're fired," his boss snapped. "I understand." Adam hung up, feeling strangely calm. For a decade, he'd chased success in New York, measuring his worth by his salary and status. But his father, the man he'd looked down on, had built something far more valuable. Not just a fortune, but relationships, respect, a community. The next morning, Adam returned to Reynolds Automotive. Bill was surprised to see him again. "I'd like to learn more," Adam said, "about everything. How my father ran things, how he treated people, all of it." Bill's eyebrows rose. "You're staying in town?" "For now," Adam said. "I owe it to my father to at least understand what he built." Over the next week, Adam immersed himself in his father's world. He spent time in each department of the business, meeting employees, many of whom had worked for Thomas for years. They all had stories about him, how he'd helped them through tough times, given second chances, treated everyone with respect regardless of position. "Your dad gave me my first job when I was 16, said Mike, now the head mechanic. "Taught me everything I know, paid for my technical school too. He loaned me money for my mother's medical bills," said Carol from accounting. "Told me to pay it back when I could, no interest. Who does that?" Story after story painted a picture of a man Adam had never known or had chosen not to see. In the evenings, Adam continued going through his father's house. In the basement workshop, he found projects Thomas had been working on, including a restored classic car with a note attached for Adam when he's ready to come home. The car was a 1967 Mustang, the model Adam had always dreamed of owning as a teenager, his father had remembered. After all these years, after all of Adam's cruelty, Thomas had remembered. On the night before Thomas's memorial service, a community event organized by the employees, rather than the brief funeral Adam had arranged, Adam sat in his father's favorite chair, holding the last photo ever taken of them together. It was from his college graduation, before he'd cut ties completely. Thomas stood awkwardly beside him in his clean but worn suit, smiling proudly, while Adam looked annoyed at his presence. "I'm sorry, Dad," Adam whispered to the photograph. "I was so wrong about you, about everything." The memorial service was held at the town park the next day. Adam expected maybe 50 people. Over 300 showed up. As he listened to person after person speak about his father, business associates, employees, townspeople whose lives Thomas had touched, Adam realized the true extent of his father's legacy. It wasn't just the businesses or the money. It was the impact he'd had on this community, the lives he'd changed through quiet generosity and genuine care. When it was Adam's turn to speak, he stood before the crowd, shaking slightly. "I didn't know my father," he began honestly. "Not the man you all knew. I thought I did, but I was wrong. I saw only what I wanted to see, a simple mechanic I could feel superior to." A murmur went through the crowd, but Adam continued. "I was successful in New York, or I thought I was. But standing here today, hearing your stories, seeing how many lives my father touched, I realize he was the truly successful one." Adam's voice broke, but he forced himself to continue. "I can't undo the years I wasted, the relationship I threw away, but I can promise you this, my father's legacy won't end with him. The businesses he built, the community he supported, the values he lived by, they'll continue. Because I'm staying in Green Valley. I'm going to learn everything I can about the man my father really was." He looked out at the sea of faces, all people who had loved Thomas Reynolds far better than his own son had. "I can't bring my father back," Adam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can try to be worthy of the fortune he left me. Not the money, but the example of the man he was." As he stepped down from the podium, Adam felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about status or appearances or what others thought of him. He was thinking about his father, A man who had lived with purpose and died loved by many, even if not by his own son. Adam had inherited millions, but that wasn't his father's true fortune. The real inheritance was the chance to become the man Thomas Reynolds had always believed his son could be. A man worthy of being called Thomas Reynolds' son, and somehow Adam would find a way to earn it. A month had passed since Adam Reynolds had shocked everyone, including himself, by announcing he was staying in Green Valley. The news had spread quickly through the small town. Thomas Reynolds' big city son was taking over the family businesses. "You're really doing this?" Margaret Wilson asked one evening as they sat on Adam's porch. In the weeks since the memorial service, she'd become something of a friend and guide to Adam, filling in the gaps of his father's life. "I'm trying," Adam admitted, sipping his coffee. "It's harder than I expected." That was an understatement. Despite his financial background, Adam was struggling to understand the day-to-day operations of his father's auto shops. He'd spent the past month shadowing Bill Cooper, learning everything from inventory management to customer relations. "Your father didn't build all this overnight," Margaret reminded him. "He had 20 years to figure it out. Give yourself time." Time was something Adam had never given himself before. In New York, everything had been about immediate results, instant gratification. Here in Green Valley, he was learning patience. The next morning, Adam arrived at the main shop earlier than usual. He was surprised to find Mike, the head mechanic, already there working on a beaten-up old Toyota. "You're here early," Adam commented. Mike glanced up. "Mrs. Diaz needs her car for work. She's a single mom, 3 kids. Your dad always made sure her car was ready first thing." Adam nodded, making a mental note. These were the details no business spreadsheet could show him, the personal touches that had made his father special. "Need an extra hand?" Adam asked. Impulsively, Mike gave him a skeptical look. "You know anything about cars?" "Not really," Adam admitted. "But I can learn." For the next hour, Mike showed Adam how to change oil, check filters, and perform basic maintenance. Adam's expensive suit got stained with grease. His manicured hands became dirty, but he didn't care. For the first time, he was doing what his father had done every day for decades. When Mrs. Diaz arrived to pick up her car, Adam was wiping his hands on a shop rag. "No charge today," he told her. "My father would have wanted that." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Your dad was a good man. He always took care of us after my husband left." "I'm learning that more every day," Adam said softly. Later that morning, Bill found Adam in the office, studying the books. "There's something I don't understand," Adam said, pointing to a series of payments. "These customers haven't paid their bills in months, some even years." "Why didn't my father collect?" Bill sat down across from him. "Those are special cases. The Johnsons lost their farm. The Patels have a daughter with medical bills. Your father kept a separate list." He pulled open a drawer and handed Adam a worn notebook. Inside, in Thomas's neat handwriting, were notes about each account, not just payment information, but personal details. Who was struggling, who needed extra time, who could only pay a little each month. He called them his breathing room accounts, Bill explained. Said everyone needs a chance to catch their breath sometimes. Adam stared at the notebook, a lump forming in his throat. His father, whom he dismissed as financially naive, had been running a business with both his head and his heart. "We'll keep the list," Adam decided. "Keep giving them breathing room." Bill nodded approvingly. "You're starting to sound like him." The comparison both warmed and stung Adam. He was nowhere near the man his father had been. Not yet. Maybe not ever, as weeks turned into months. Adam settled into life in Green Valley. He sold his New York apartment, moved permanently into his father's house, and fully committed to running Reynolds Automotive. The town was starting to accept him, not just as Thomas Reynolds' son, but as his own person. But not everyone was happy about Adam's presence. Martin Grayson, owner of the competing Grayson Motors across town, had been eyeing Reynolds Automotive for years. Thomas had repeatedly refused to sell, turning down offers that grew increasingly generous. "Mr. Reynolds," Martin said smoothly, appearing in Adam's office one afternoon without an appointment. "I don't believe we've formally met." Adam recognized him from the memorial service, a tall man with silver hair, and an expensive suit that reminded Adam of his former life. "Mr. Grayson, what can I do for you?" "I'll get straight to the point. I'd like to buy Reynolds Automotive, all 3 locations. I'm prepared to offer $15 million, $5 million more than what your father's business is currently worth." Adam blinked in surprise. It was a generous offer, more than generous. "I'm not interested in selling," he said. "Think about it," Grayson pressed. "You're not a mechanic. You're not from here anymore. Take the money and go back to New York. Live the life you're used to." 6 months ago, Adam would have signed the papers without hesitation. Now he felt a surge of protectiveness toward his father's legacy. "The business isn't for sale," he said firmly. "At any price." Grayson's friendly demeanor cooled. "Your father was stubborn too. It didn't serve him well in the end." "What does that mean?" "Just that holding on to the past can be costly," Grayson said vaguely. "My offer won't stay open forever. Think about it." After Grayson left, Adam called Bill into his office and recounted the conversation. "He's wanted to monopolize the auto business in this county for years," Bill explained. "Your father was the only thing standing in his way. And now I am," Adam said thoughtfully. Bill nodded. "Your father always said Grayson was all about profit, not people. He cut corners, overcharged customers, treated employees like they were disposable." "Everything my father wasn't," Adam murmured. That evening, Adam pulled out the box of his father's business records, looking for any mention of Martin Grayson. What he found surprised him. 5 years ago, Grayson had nearly succeeded in buying Reynolds Automotive. Thomas had been in financial trouble after extending too much credit to struggling customers during a recession. The paperwork showed Grayson had offered $8 million then, a fair price at the time. Thomas had been a day away from signing when something changed his mind. Adam dug deeper and found a newspaper clipping from the same week. "Local bank manager arrested for fraud." According to the article, the manager had been working with an unnamed business owner to artificially devalue competing businesses by denying them loans, then buying them at reduced prices. There was no direct link to Grayson, but Adam's instincts told him there was a connection. His father must have suspected the same thing and backed out of the deal. A note in his father's handwriting confirmed it. "Won't sell to a man who profits from others' misfortune. Found alternative funding." That alternative had been risky. Thomas had mortgaged everything, taken out personal loans, even sold his beloved fishing cabin. But he'd kept the business independent. Adam sat back, staring at the evidence of his father's integrity. Thomas Reynolds had risked everything to protect his employees and customers from a man like Grayson. "I won't let him win now," Adam said aloud. "Not after everything Dad did to stop him." The next day, Adam called a meeting of all Reynolds Automotive employees across all 3 locations. Standing before them in the main garage, he felt a nervous energy he'd never experienced in his Wall Street presentations. "I wanted to let you all know that I was approached yesterday with an offer to buy the business," he began. A murmur ran through the crowd. "I turned it down." Relief spread visibly across the room. "Reynolds Automotive isn't just a business," Adam continued. "It's a family. At least that's how my father ran it. I'm still learning, still trying to understand all that he built here. But I want you to know that I'm committed to continuing his legacy, not just the successful business part, but the way he treated people." He looked around at the faces watching him, some hopeful, some still skeptical. "My father believed in second chances. He believed in helping people when they needed it. He believed business was about more than just money." Adam took a deep breath. "I didn't understand any of that before, but I'm starting to now." Mike stepped forward. "Your dad was 1 in a million, Adam. We don't expect you to be exactly like him." "I know," Adam said quietly. "I could never fill his shoes, but I can try to walk in the same direction." The meeting ended with a sense of renewed purpose. Adam felt for the first time that he might actually belong in Green Valley, that he might find a meaningful life here carrying on his father's work. That sense of possibility lasted exactly 3 days. On Thursday morning, Adam arrived at the main shop to find Bill waiting for him with a grim expression. "What's wrong?" Adam asked. "The bank called. They're foreclosing on the West Side location." What? That's impossible. All the businesses are profitable. Bill handed him a letter. Apparently, your father took out a loan last year using that property as collateral. The payments are 3 months overdue. Adam scanned the document in disbelief. This doesn't make sense. My father kept meticulous records. There's no mention of this loan in any of his files. That's not all, Bill continued. We just lost the Miller account, our biggest commercial customer. They called this morning to cancel all services, said they got a better deal from Grayson. Adam's mind raced. This couldn't be coincidence, not right after he'd refused Grayson's offer. There's more, Bill said, his voice even graver. The state inspector showed up at the downtown location this morning. Claims they received an anonymous tip about safety violations. They're threatening to shut us down pending a full investigation. Adam sank into a chair. Grayson. It has to be. That's what I'm thinking. But proving it, we need to fight back, Adam said, standing up. Get our lawyer on the phone and I need to see that loan document again. Over the next few days, Adam barely slept as he fought battles on multiple fronts. The bank loan turned out to be legitimate. Thomas had taken it out to help an employee named Carlos pay for his wife's cancer treatment. But the payment schedule had been altered. Someone had changed the terms after Thomas signed. The safety. Inspection revealed minor issues, easily fixable, but the process had been expedited in an unusual way, and the lost commercial account was clearly the result of price manipulation. Grayson was offering services below cost, something he couldn't sustain long-term. He's trying to break us, Adam told Margaret during one of their evening porch conversations. Force me to sell. Your father dealt with Grayson for years, she reminded him. He always found a way through. But I'm not my father, Adam said bitterly. I don't have his experience, his connections in town. No, Margaret agreed. But you have something he didn't. What's that? New York financial skills, a different perspective. Use what you know, Adam. The words stayed with him that night. As he pored over financial statements, looking for a solution. What did he know that his father hadn't? What Wall Street tactics could he apply to a small-town business war? By morning, Adam had a plan. He called Bill and outlined it quickly. It's risky, Bill warned. So was everything my father did to keep this place going, Adam replied. I think he'd approve. That afternoon, Adam paid a visit to the local newspaper, the Green Valley Gazette. Sarah Jenkins, the editor, was an old classmate of his. Adam Reynolds, she said, surprised to see him. I heard you were back in town for good. That's part of what I wanted to talk to you about, Adam said. I have a story for you, a big one. For the next hour, Adam laid out everything he'd discovered about Martin Grayson's business practices. The predatory pricing, the manipulated loan documents, the suspicious timing of the safety inspection. This is serious stuff, Sarah said. But it's all circumstantial. Grayson could sue us for libel. You don't have to name him directly, Adam explained. Just report on the pattern. Let people draw their own conclusions. Sarah considered it. I'll need more than just your word. I thought you might. Adam pulled out a USB drive. Financial records showing the price manipulation, statements from former Grayson employees about corner cutting on repairs, and this, he handed her a file containing court records from 3 other counties where Grayson had used similar tactics to eliminate competition. Where did you get all this? Let's just say my Wall Street research skills came in handy, Adam said with a small smile. Will you run it? I'll need a day to verify everything, Sarah said, already looking through the documents with interest. But if it checks out, absolutely. The next part of Adam's plan involved a more personal approach. He spent the evening calling every customer who had switched from Reynolds to Grayson in the past month. He didn't make accusations or beg for their return. Instead, he simply asked about their experience. We're always looking to improve, he explained to each one. I'd appreciate any feedback on why you chose to make a change. The responses were revealing. Most mentioned dramatic price cuts that seemed too good to be true. Some mentioned special limited time offers. A few admitted they'd been told Reynolds Automotive was in financial trouble and might not be around much longer. Adam kept detailed notes of each conversation, building his case. The final piece of his strategy involved Carlos, the employee whose medical bills had prompted his father's last loan. Carlos had left Reynolds Automotive 3 months ago to work for Grayson, another detail that now seemed suspicious. Adam drove to Carlos's house on Friday evening. The man was surprised to see him. "Mr. Reynolds, what are you doing here?" "I need to ask you something, Carlos, about the loan my father took out for your wife's treatment." Carlos's expression grew guarded. "What about it?" "Did someone approach you recently? Someone who knew about the loan?" Carlos looked away, confirming Adam's suspicion without words. "I'm not here to blame you," Adam assured him. "I just need to know what happened." Slowly, the truth emerged. Grayson had offered Carlos a job with better pay and benefits, but only if he shared information about Thomas's financial arrangements. Carlos, desperate to keep paying for his wife's treatments, had agreed. "I didn't know he would use it against the business," Carlos said, his voice breaking. "Your father was so good to us. I never wanted to betray him." "You didn't betray him," Adam said gently. "You were trying to take care of your family. That's exactly what my father would have understood." Adam left with Carlos's promise to provide a sworn statement about Grayson's tactics. It was the final piece he needed. On Monday morning, the Green Valley Gazette ran a front-page story, "Predatory Business Practices Threaten Local Economy." The article detailed how an unnamed prominent business owner was systematically working to create a monopoly through questionable methods. By noon, the story had spread throughout town. Adam's phone rang constantly, customers wanting to confirm their appointments, employees asking questions, even the bank calling to discuss irregularities they discovered in the loan documentation. At 3 o'clock, Martin Grayson stormed into Adam's office. "You think you're clever," he snarled. "That article might not name me, but everyone knows who it's about." Adam leaned back in his chair, his father's chair. "Truth hurts, doesn't it? You have no proof I did anything wrong." "Actually, I do," Adam said calmly. "Sworn statements, financial records, even some interesting text messages Carlos was smart enough to save." "You've been sloppy, Mr. Grayson." Grayson's face paled slightly. "What do you want?" "I want you to back off. Cancel that loan foreclosure, stop poaching our customers with unsustainable prices, and leave Reynolds Automotive alone." "Or what?" "Or I take everything I have to the state attorney general," Adam said simply. "I may be new to running an auto shop, but I know a lot about financial fraud. It was my specialty in New York." Grayson stared at him for a long moment, calculating. Finally, he nodded stiffly. "Your father was a stubborn fool who never understood real business," he said coldly. "I see the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." "Thank you," Adam said sincerely. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." After Grayson left, Bill entered the office. "Is it over?" "For now," Adam said. "He's a businessman. When the cost becomes too high, he'll move on to easier targets." Bill shook his head in admiration. "Your father would have been proud. He fought Grayson for years, but never managed to back him down like this." "I had an advantage," Adam admitted. "I know how predators like Grayson think, because I used to be one of them. On Wall Street, we called it aggressive acquisition strategy. Here we call it what it is, bullying and manipulation." That evening, Adam drove to the cemetery where his father was buried. He hadn't visited since the funeral, too caught up in the whirlwind of discovering and then saving his father's legacy. The simple headstone read, "Thomas Reynolds, beloved father, friend, and neighbor." Adam placed a hand on the cool marble. "I think I'm starting to understand now, Dad. What you were building all those years. It wasn't just businesses, it was community, it was family." He sat on the grass beside the grave, feeling both loss and connection. "I fought for your business today. Used every trick I learned in New York, but for the right reasons this time." Adam smiled sadly. "You always said I was smart, that I could do anything I set my mind to. I never thanked you for believing in me." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree shading the cemetery. Adam could almost imagine it was his father's response. "I'm trying to be worthy of what you built, Dad, of what you left me. Not just the money, but everything else. The trust people had in you, the example you set." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Adam made a promise, not just to his father's memory, but to himself. I'm going to make you proud, Dad. I don't know if I can ever be the man you were, but I'm going to try. Every day I'm going to try. Standing to leave, Adam felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. The fortune he had inherited was far more than millions in assets and businesses. It was the chance to become someone better than he had been, someone worthy of being called Thomas Reynolds' son. And for the first time since returning to Green Valley, Adam truly believed he might succeed. 1 year had passed since Adam Reynolds first returned to Green Valley for his father's funeral. The seasons had cycled through, summer fading to autumn, winter melting into spring, and now summer once again, painting the town in vibrant greens and bright flowers. Adam stood in front of Reynolds Automotive's main location, watching as workers installed a new sign. The redesigned logo kept the original shop styling, but added a simple tagline, continuing the legacy. "Looks good," Bill said, standing beside him. Adam nodded. "Dad would have approved, I think." "He would have said it was unnecessary," Bill replied with a chuckle. "But he would have been proud." Proud. The word no longer stung Adam the way it once had. Instead, it warmed him, gave him purpose. Over the past year, he'd worked tirelessly to understand his father's businesses, to earn the respect of the employees and the trust of the community. There had been missteps and challenges along the way, but also successes that went beyond financial profits. Later that morning, Adam sat in his office, still his father's office, though he'd added a few personal touches, reviewing the quarterly reports. Reynolds Automotive was thriving. After the confrontation with Grayson, business had actually increased as word spread about how Adam had stood up to the predatory businessman. But Adam's focus had expanded beyond just running the auto shops. Following his father's example, he'd become more involved in the community. He now sat on the board of the local hospital, had established a scholarship fund for students interested in vocational training, and had recently approved a plan to renovate the town's aging community center. Knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Margaret Wilson entered, carrying a small box. "I was cleaning out my attic and found this," she said, placing it on his desk. "I think Thomas would want you to have it." Adam opened the box carefully. Inside were photographs, old ones from before, his memory. His father as a young man smiling beside a beautiful woman. "Your mother," Margaret explained gently. "These were taken just after they were married. Thomas gave them to me for safekeeping during his divorce. I think he was afraid of damaging them in a moment of pain." Adam picked up one of the photos. His mother looked happy, carefree, her arm linked with his father's. It was hard to reconcile. This image with the bitter woman who had left when Adam was 7, taking him with her and filling his ears with criticism of Thomas. "They loved each other once," Margaret said. "Before everything." Adam had never asked about the divorce. His mother had told him it was because his father was a loser, a nobody with no ambition. Now, looking at these photos, he wondered what the real story had been. What happened between them? Margaret hesitated. "It's not my place to say." "Please," Adam said. "I need to know." She sat down, considering her words carefully. "Your mother had different dreams. She wanted luxury, status, a bigger life than Green Valley could offer. Thomas was content here. He loved his work, loved this town." It sounded familiar, too familiar. Adam had inherited his mother's ambitions, her disdain for simple living. "When she left, she wanted to take you away completely," Margaret continued. "But Thomas fought for partial custody. He worked extra jobs to pay the legal fees. Even after the divorce was finalized, he kept sending child support, more than the court ordered." Adam's throat tightened. "I didn't know that." "Your mother didn't tell you, I imagine, and Thomas wouldn't have. He never spoke badly about her, not once. Just said you both wanted different things from life." Adam stared at the photographs, at the smiling faces of two people who had once loved each other. His entire childhood, he'd believed his father was weak, a failure. His mother had reinforced that view at every opportunity. "Why didn't she want me to know him?" Adam asked, more to himself than to Margaret. "Sometimes," she said gently, "it's easier to justify leaving when you convince yourself the person you left behind wasn't worth staying for." The words hit Adam like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what he had done? Convinced himself his father was worthless to justify cutting him out of his life. "Thank you for these," he said, carefully returning the photos to the box. "I appreciate you keeping them all these years." After Margaret left, Adam sat alone in his office, thinking about the parallels between his mother's choices and his own. Both had abandoned Thomas Reynolds, believing they deserved better. Both had been terribly wrong. That evening, Adam did something he'd been putting off for months. He called his mother. Rebecca Reynolds Harrington lived in a luxury condo in Miami with her third husband, a retired investment banker. She seemed surprised to hear from Adam. They typically spoke only on holidays and birthdays. "Darling, what a lovely surprise," she said, her voice artificially bright. "How is New York? Still conquering Wall Street?" "I'm not in New York anymore, Mom," Adam said. "I'm in Green Valley. I've been here for a year now." A long silence followed. "Green Valley, whatever for? Don't tell me you're still dealing with your father's affairs." The dismissive tone grated on Adam. "Yes, actually. I'm running his businesses." Businesses? That grimy auto shop? Adam, you can't be serious. 3 auto shops, actually, plus rental properties and various investments. Dad built quite an empire here. Another silence, longer this time. "I see." "No, I don't think you do," Adam said, his voice even. "Dad wasn't who you always said he was. He wasn't a loser or a nobody. He was respected, successful. He left me $10 million, Mom." He could hear her sharp intake of breath. "That's not possible." "It's true. All those years you told me he was worthless. He was building something meaningful, something I threw away because I believed the lies." "I never lied," she said defensively. "He was a mechanic. He lived in that tiny house. He wore those cheap clothes." "Because that's who he was," Adam said. "He didn't need expensive things to feel valuable. He knew what mattered." The conversation continued awkwardly for a few more minutes before his mother made an excuse to end the call. Adam wasn't surprised. He hadn't expected a dramatic reconciliation or an admission of wrongdoing. The call hadn't been about changing, it had been about acknowledging the truth for himself. The next day, Saturday, Adam drove to the outskirts of town, to a plot of land his father had purchased years ago but never developed. According to Bill, Thomas had bought it with vague plans of building a house there someday, but had never gotten around to it. The property was beautiful, 20 acres with a stream running through it, backing up to a forested hillside. Standing there in the morning sunshine, Adam could understand why his father had been drawn to it. It felt peaceful, separate from the world, but still connected to the town in the valley below. As he walked the property, Adam's mind filled with possibilities. This land represented a fresh start, a chance to build something new while honoring the past. He took out his phone and called Rachel Thompson, no relation, though the coincidence of names had been a conversation starter when they'd first met 6 months ago at a Chamber of Commerce meeting. She was an architect who specialized in sustainable design. "Adam, is everything okay?" she answered, surprised by the weekend call. "Everything's fine," he assured her. "I was wondering if you're free this afternoon. There's something I'd like to show you." Rachel arrived a few hours later, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, clipboard in hand as always. At 34, she had returned to Green Valley after a successful career in Chicago, drawn back by aging parents and a desire for a simpler life. Adam had been attracted to her immediately, not just to her warm smile and intelligent eyes, but to her values, her commitment to community. They'd been dating casually for 3 months, taking things slow, both cautious after previous relationships that had prioritized status over substance. "So this is the mysterious property," she said, looking around appreciatively. "It's beautiful." "My father bought it 15 years ago," Adam explained. "He never built on it, but I think he must have had dreams for this place." They walked the land together, Rachel making notes and sketches, asking questions about water sources and soil composition. Adam watched her, admiring her focus and expertise. "What do you see here?" she asked finally, setting down her clipboard. "What would you want to build?" Adam looked out over the rolling meadow to the trees beyond. "Not just a house, something more." I've been thinking a lot about my father's legacy, about what Green Valley needs. He outlined his idea, a vocational training center with a focus on automotive technology, but expanding to other trades as well. A place where young people could learn practical skills, where those wanting career changes could get new training, where the community could gather for classes and events. The Thomas Reynolds Technical Institute, he said, with scholarships for students who couldn't otherwise afford training, and a community space open to everyone. Rachel's eyes lit up. Adam, that's amazing, ambitious but amazing. Too ambitious? He asked. She shook her head. No, it's exactly what this town needs, and what a wonderful way to honor your father. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, refining the concept, Rachel sketching preliminary ideas while Adam talked through the practicalities. By sunset, they had the beginnings of a plan. Thank you for this, Adam said as they stood by their cars preparing to leave, for understanding why it matters. Rachel smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. I never met your father, but from everything you've told me, I think he would be proud of what you're becoming. I hope so, Adam said softly. Over the next 6 months, the Thomas Reynolds Technical Institute moved from concept to reality. Adam invested a significant portion of his inheritance, set up a non-profit foundation to oversee operations, and worked closely with Rachel on the design. The groundbreaking ceremony in early December brought out most of the town despite the cold. My father believed in second chances, Adam told the crowd gathered on the snow-dusted property. He believed in building people up, in creating opportunities. This institute will continue that work, giving people the skills they need to build better lives. Construction began immediately after the ceremony, with a target opening date of the following September. Adam threw himself into the project while still managing the auto shops and other businesses. It was exhausting, but fulfilling work. Christmas Eve, exactly 18 months after he'd returned to Green Valley for his father's funeral, Adam found himself back at his house, hosting a small gathering. Bill and his wife were there, along with Margaret, Mike from the shop and his family, and Rachel. The house was decorated simply but warmly, a fire crackling in the fireplace, the scent of gingerbread filling the air. Adam had kept most of his father's furniture, adding only a few pieces of his own. The home felt lived in, comfortable in a way his sterile New York apartment never had. As the evening progressed, Adam found himself standing in the doorway to the living room, watching his guests laugh and talk. Rachel caught his eye from across the room and smiled warmly. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, joining him. "I was just thinking about last Christmas," he admitted. "I spent it alone in my apartment working on a merger deal. I had everything I thought I wanted, but I was miserable and didn't even know it." Rachel leaned against him slightly. "And now I have everything I never knew I needed," he said simply. After dinner, as the guests gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, Adam excused himself briefly. He went to his father's study, still his father's in Adam's mind, though he used it daily, and retrieved a small box from the desk drawer. Returning to the living room, he cleared his throat nervously. "I wanted to thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "When I came back to Green Valley, I was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, I was the son who abandoned Thomas Reynolds. None of you had any reason to welcome me or help me understand what my father had built here." He looked around at their faces, these people who had become his friends, his support system, his community. "But you did help me. You shared your stories, your memories. You gave me a chance to learn who my father really was. And in doing that, you helped me figure out who I want to be." Adam turned to Margaret. "This is for you," he said, handing her a small wrapped package. She opened it curiously, revealing a framed photograph of Thomas, one Adam had found in the attic, showing his father laughing at a company picnic surrounded by employees. That was taken at his 50th birthday celebration, Bill remembered fondly. "We surprised him with a cake shaped like a carburetor. He laughed for 10 minutes. Straight." Margaret wiped away a tear. "It's perfect, thank you." Adam had gifts for everyone. Thoughtful items that showed he'd been paying attention to their lives, their needs, their wishes. For Bill, a fishing trip to the mountain lake his father had loved. For Mike, college fund contributions for his children. For each person, something meaningful rather than extravagant. Rachel was the last. Adam handed her a small envelope, suddenly nervous. She opened it, pulling out a key with a confused expression. "What's this?" "The key to my father's fishing cabin," Adam explained. "The one I was telling you about up by the lake. He sold it years ago to keep the business afloat during hard times. I tracked down the current owner last month and bought it back." Rachel looked at him questioningly. "I thought maybe so we could fix it up together," Adam continued. "Make it ours, a place to get away, to build memories." The room had gone quiet, everyone watching them with barely concealed smiles. "Adam Reynolds," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Are you asking me to help you renovate a cabin, or are you asking me something else?" Adam took a deep breath. "Both, I think. The cabin is just the beginning. I'm asking if you want to build a life with me, here, in this town, continuing what my father started, but making it our own." Rachel stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. "Yes," she whispered, "to the cabin and to everything else." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. As Adam held Rachel close, he felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that he'd never experienced in his ambitious New York life. Later that night, after everyone had gone and Rachel had left with a lingering kiss and promises for Christmas Day, Adam sat alone in his father's favorite chair by the fireplace. On the mantel above him stood the framed photo of him and Thomas at his college graduation, the last picture they'd taken together. "I wish you could see this, Dad," Adam said softly, to the empty room. "I wish you could see that I finally understand." He thought about the path that had brought him here, from the angry, ambitious young man who had rejected his father to the person he was becoming, someone who valued community over status, relationships over wealth, someone more like Thomas Reynolds. The institute would open in 9 months. He and Rachel were talking about a fall wedding. The auto shops were thriving. Green Valley felt like home in a way no place ever had before. None of it would have happened if his father hadn't left him that fortune. Not the money, but the example, the legacy, the chance to become someone better. "I didn't deserve any of this," Adam admitted to the quiet room. "Not your forgiveness, not your legacy, certainly not your pride." He looked at the photograph, at his father's face. Even then, even as Adam had been coldly enduring the man's presence at his graduation, Thomas had been looking at his son with unmistakable love. "But I'm trying to earn it now," Adam promised. "Every day I'm trying." Outside, snow began to fall, dusting Green Valley in white. Inside, Adam Reynolds sat in his father's chair in his father's house, finally at peace with being his father's son. The fortune he had inherited wasn't in the bank accounts or businesses or properties. It was in the values Thomas had lived by, the example he had set, the love he had given without condition or expectation of return. It had taken Adam 32 years and his father's death to understand that. But now that he did, he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of it, the fortune he had never deserved but had been given anyway, by a father who had never stopped believing in the man his son could become. In the quiet of the Christmas Eve night, Adam made one final promise to his father's memory. "I'll make you proud, Dad. Not with success or money or status, but by being the kind of man you always were. Someone who helps others, who builds community, who values what truly matters." As if in answer, the fire crackled warmly, and Adam felt, for the first time since his father's death, that maybe Thomas could hear him after all. And maybe, just maybe, he already was proud of the journey his son had begun. Adam touched the photograph gently. "Merry Christmas, Dad," he whispered, "and thank you for everything." Outside, the snow continued to fall on Green Valley, covering the town in a pristine blanket of white. Life would go on. The institute would be built. A wedding would be planned. Businesses would thrive. A community would grow stronger. And through it all, the legacy of Thomas Reynolds would continue, not just in the buildings that bore his name or the foundation established in his honor, but in the son who had finally come home and found the fortune his father had been building for him all along. A fortune not of money, but of meaning. Not of wealth, but of worth. Not of possessions, but of purpose. The fortune of a life well lived passed from father to son, a gift Adam had rejected for too long, but would cherish now for the rest of his days, the fortune he had never deserved, but would forever be grateful for. The end.